There was a time when fast food in Britain meant wimpy. You sat down, a waitress brought your food, and you had a Coke float in a tall glass, ice cream bobbing at the top, cold and sweet, a plate, a knife and fork, cartoons on the telly in the corner. That was fast food in Britain. Then the 1980s happened, and America arrived on the high street in force. The golden arches, the red roofs, the counter service and the paper wrappers and the toys in the Happy Meal box. It was new and loud and bright and exciting in a way that is difficult to explain now. This was before the guilt, before the calories, before any of it needed defending. Let's step into that world. Fast food came to Britain gradually, and then all at once. Through the early 1980s, the golden arches multiplied across London, and then outward, town by town, a high street by high street. For many British families, the experience was genuinely new. Not the idea of eating out, nay, that existed, but eating like this, standing at a counter, ordering quickly, carrying your own tray, eating with your hands. It was American behaviour, imported wholesale, and Britain took to it with surprising enthusiasm. Before McDonald's reshaped everything, Wimpy was British fast food. It had been on the high street since 1954, and by the 1980s, it was woven into ordinary life in a way that is easy to underestimate now. You went to Wimpy after hospital appointments. You went on a Saturday with your mum. You met your mates there and talked about music and football and whatever was on the telly. Your food came on a plate, a proper plate, with a knife and fork. In the Coke float arrived in a tall glass with ice cream bobbing at the top. The pear milkshake came in a glass too, cold and sweet and unlike anything McDonald's would ever serve. Cartoons played on the telly in the corner. The frothy coffee was for the adults. It was unhurried, it was table service. It was, in its own modest way, civilised. The menu had its own logic. The bender in a bun, a fried sausage in a soft roll, was a wimpy original that had no American equivalent. The brown derby was a donut with icing, served as dessert. The burgers were cooked to order, which meant they took longer, which meant nobody minded because that was simply how eating out worked. Staff knew regulars. Regulars came back. The whole experience was local in a way that McDonald's by design could never be. McDonald's had counter service. You queued and you ordered. You paid, you carried, no plates, no cutlery. You ate your burger from the wrapper and disposed of your own rubbish when you were done. British customers in the early 1980s were not always sure what to make of this. Queuing, they understood. Queuing was a national discipline, but the rest was unfamiliar. Ordering quickly under mild pressure from the queue behind you, paying immediately, carrying your own tray to a seat you had chosen yourself, eating with your hands from paper wrappers. It sounds unremarkable now. In 1982 it was a learned behaviour. Within a few years it was second nature. The food arrived fast, genuinely fast, hot and immediate in a way that felt almost rude compared to the wimpy pace. That speed was the point, that was the product as much as the burger itself. You were in and out. And the whole transaction took minutes. For busy families on a Saturday this was a revelation. For people who had grown up with Wimpy, it was slightly bewildering, at least at first. A hamburger cost around 40 or 50 pence in the early 1980s. A Big Mac was under £1. A family of four could eat for £3 to £5. By the standards of the time, that was real money, and fast food in Britain never quite became the unremarkable daily routine it was in America. It remained a treat. Something you did on a Saturday. Something that marked an occasion. A shopping trip to the town centre, a school holiday, a birthday. Children remembered specific visits. They could tell you which McDonald's they went to and roughly when. This was before fast food was ordinary. It was still something. And the birthday party experience arrived in Britain just as it was peaking in America. Party packages and a reserved area, happy meals for the guests, a birthday cake, paper hats, employees running simple games. Ronald McDonald was identically cheerful on both sides of the Atlantic. Getting invited to a McDonald's birthday party in 1980s, Britain was exciting in a specific way. It combined two treats at once. The play areas were simple. Climbing frames, metal slides, no rubberized safety surfaces underneath, Parents sat nearby with coffee, children ate their happy meals and then ran. It was contained and manageable and sufficiently American to feel like an event. Fast food in 1980s, Britain carried a charge that it did not carry in America in quite the same way. In the United States it was for everyone and had been for years. And in Britain it was inexpensive and informal and American. And American carried its own prestige in the 1980s. The trainers were American, the music was American, the films were American. Now the food was American too. For working families in particular, taking children to McDonald's felt modern and generous. It was not a proper restaurant, and nobody pretended otherwise. But it was something. It was participating in something current, and this was before fast food was ordinary. In the early 1980s, it was cheap and convenient, and for much of the decade, faintly glamorous by origin. Burger King expanded through British high streets across the 1980s, flame grilled rather than fried, have it your way, a slightly different proposition. In practice, British consumers often experienced the two chains as variations on the same broad category. And both had burgers, both had fries, both were American. Promotions ran constantly. Limited time offers appeared and disappeared. The two chains occupied neighbouring spots on some high streets, which would have seemed extraordinary a decade earlier. By 1988 it was unremarkable. McDonald's had won the high street. Wimpy would never fully recover. The plate and the knife and fork were gone. The Coke float in the tall glass was gone. What replaced them was faster and cheaper and louder, and most people decided that was fine. The smell hit you before you got through the door. Frying oil and warm bread and something sweet underneath. An industrial sweetness with no equivalent anywhere else on the high street. You could smell a McDonald's from 20 feet away on a wet Tuesday in November, and it pulled at something specific. In that smell was the experience beginning. Everything else came after. Every fast food restaurant in 1980s Britain allowed smoking. Ashtrays sat on the tables as standard. At McDonald's, they were foil, embossed with the golden arches, small and disposable and replaced without ceremony. People smoked while they ate, between bites after finishing, while their children worked through happy meals beside them. The smell of cigarette smoke mixed with frying oil, and it was simply part of the atmosphere. Nobody separated it out as unpleasant. It was the ambient condition of indoor public life. There were no non-smoking sections. The idea had not arrived yet. Employees smoked in the back. You would finish your meal with cigarette smoke in your hair and your clothes, and you would not have noticed. And the ban on indoor smoking in British public spaces was still decades away. In the 1980s, smoke was just what the air contained. Fast food came in styrofoam. The Big Mac clamshell, the quarter-pounder box, the coffee cups, all styrofoam, white and lightweight, squeaking when you opened them. The material kept food warm and was cheap to produce. Nobody questioned what happened to it afterwards. Environmental concern existed in the abstract for some people. It had not reached the level of interrogating your burger container. Styrofoam was convenient, that was sufficient. The trays were hard red plastic. The paper bags turned translucent with grease within minutes. McDonald's moved toward paper packaging around 1990. For the entire 1980s, the squeak of styrofoam was part of the meal. And McDonald's restaurants were bright in a way that British public spaces generally were not. Primary colours, red, yellow, hard plastic seats, tables bolted to the floor, lighting that left no shadows. The aesthetic was cheerful and functional. You were not supposed to linger. It was also loud. The ambient noise of a 1980s McDonald's, trays on hard surfaces, the thump of the fryer basket children, the crackle of the intercom, was a specific kind of noise, quite different from the subdued clatter of a British cafe. For children it was exciting. For parents it was manageable. This was before soft seating, before Wi-Fi, before McDonald's tried to feel relaxing. It was just fast and bright and loud. Wimpy had cartoons on the telly and frothy coffee and a waitress who knew your order. McDonald's had none of that and did not need any of it. And the speed was the point. Pizza Hut expanded significantly through the 1980s. The red roof restaurants appeared on retail parks and town centres across Britain, arriving first in London and spreading outward through the decade. Going to Pizza Hut was not the same as going to McDonald's. It was slower, more deliberate, more like a proper occasion. You sat down, a waitress took your order. You waited for your pizza. For many British families in the early 1980s, a proper pizza, deep dish, melted cheese, hot from the oven in a real restaurant, was still genuinely new. Before Pizza Hut reached your town, you might only have known the small frozen versions, hard and thin, closer to a digestive biscuit than anything Italian. The salad bar was the attraction. All you could eat, fixed price, license, to pile your plate as high as you could manage. It's lettuce, pasta salad, coleslaw, crouton, bread rolls. People approached it with a seriousness the actual salad did not merit. The personal pan pizza was popular with children. The lunch buffet offered all you could eat for a few pounds. Pizza Hut was fast food trying to be a real restaurant. In 1980s Britain, that positioning worked perfectly. Eating there felt like an event rather than a convenience. KFC had been in Britain since 1965, which made it older than McDonald's UK by nearly a decade. By the 1980s, it was established without being everywhere. The bucket was the product, original recipe or extra crispy, taken home or eaten at the plastic tables inside. The sides were mashed potato coleslaw and a biscuit that belonged to no British baking tradition. Colonel Sanders was still the mascot. His face was on every bucket, right on the signage, on the bags. Friday nights at KFC became a ritual for certain families. You would queue and the smell of the fryer hit you immediately. Distinct from McDonald's, distinct from the chip shop, not quite like anything else. The bucket implied sharing. It implied taking food home and eating around a table. It positioned itself as family food, and it was right. Fast food jobs were standard teenage employment in 1980s Britain. You turned 16, you applied, and if you were lucky, you got a Saturday shift, and then more hours if you wanted them. At Wimpy, you might earn £10.50 for a 7-hour shift, with a free dinner and drinks thrown in. The work was unhurried by American standards. Table service meant you had time between customers, time to talk, time to breathe. McDonald's and Burger King were different, and the work was hot and relentless and smelled of grease, and by the end of a shift, you carried that smell home with you. Minimum wage did not exist in Britain until 1999. Fast food workers were paid whatever the chain decided, which was not much. The uniforms were polyester and unflattering. Visored caps, striped shirts, the particular corporate colour of each chain. Nobody looked good. This was accepted as one of the conditions. The work was not stigmatised. It was just what you did for spending money at 16. You worked the register, made fries, cleaned the bathrooms, smiled at customers. At the end of the shift, your feet hurt, and you smelled like a chip pan, and you had enough money for the weekend. The chip shop did not panic, and it had been feeding Britain for over a century, and it had survived rationing and recession and the arrival of Wimpy, and it saw no particular reason to worry. The chip shop was on every corner. It was open in the evenings when McDonald's was still learning its hours. It was cheap without qualification. A bag of chips cost pennies, eaten walking, out of paper, in the cold. Friday night chips were not a choice. They were a ritual. They were practically law. The chip shop was fast food before fast food had a name. This was before anyone called it that. It was just where you went. What McDonald's offered and what the chip shop offered were different things, and for most of the 1980s, the two existed in parallel. The chip shop was local. It knew its customers. And it had been on that street for 20 years, and the family behind the counter had been there just as long. McDonald's was corporate and identical and operated to a manual. These were not equivalent experiences, and British consumers understood the difference. But by the mid to late 1980s, the pressure was visible. Some chip shops expanded their menus, burgers, pizzas, things outside the traditional repertoire. By around 1988, certain chippies were doing proper pizzas in boxes with melted cheese, hot and unfamiliar and fascinating to children who had only ever known the small frozen versions. Others ignored the competition entirely and continued as they always had. The ones that lasted longest tended to be the ones that knew exactly what they were and did not try to become something else. Before the chains arrived in force, The British High Street had its own ecosystem. A grocer, a butcher, a bakery. The tea man came in his van. The pop man followed. You collected empty bottles for 5 pence each. The milkman came before you were awake. These were not romantic abstractions. They were the practical infrastructure of everyday life, and they were still functioning in the early 1980s alongside the new arrivals. McDonald's and Pizza Hut and KFC did not destroy this world overnight, but they were part of a broader shift toward chains, toward uniformity, toward the same shops on every high street in every town. By the end of the decade, the direction was clear. The independent businesses were retreating. The chains were winning. The Happy Meal arrived in Britain in the early 1980s, and British children responded exactly as American children had. The toy was the point. And not the burger, not the fries. The toy was what you asked about before you sat down. Simple plastic figures, small cars, character licensed items tied to whatever film McDonald's had a promotional arrangement with. Star Wars, E.T., Batman. The toys were not intrinsically valuable. They became valuable because there was a series and you needed the whole series, and you did not have the whole series yet. Parents found themselves returning to McDonald's with more frequency than intended, driven entirely by the logic of the incomplete set. Children genuinely loved them. The mechanism worked exactly as designed. It was very hard to say no to a child who wanted the next one. Fast food reached London first and spread outward slowly. In the early 1980s, having a McDonald's in your town was still notable. In parts of northern England, Scotland, in Wales and rural areas, the nearest McDonald's might be a significant drive. A trip to the city that included McDonald's was a trip that included McDonald's. It was on the itinerary, mentioned on the way there, remembered on the way back. By the late 1980s, this had changed substantially. Out-of-town retail parks brought Pizza Hut and KFC and Burger King to places that had previously only seen Wimpy. The motorway service station became a reliable location for McDonald's. Long car journeys acquired a predictable punctuation. You would stop at the services. You would go to McDonald's. This was simply what happened. The food was simpler than today. The burger patties were thin and greasy, cooked from frozen, seasoned with salt and not much else. The cheese was processed American cheese, orange and uniform, melted flat onto the patty. And the lettuce was iceberg, and the bun was soft and slightly sweet. And the fries were cooked in beef tallow through most of the decade, which made them taste different from the vegetable oil fries that replaced them. Hot, crispy, salty, with a depth of flavour are the later version who were never quite replicated. People who ate McDonald's fries in the 1980s will tell you they were better. They are not wrong. The shakes were thick and cold and genuinely filling. Chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, nothing like the thinner versions that came later. That was basically it. The menu was short. Nobody complained. Nutrition information was not posted anywhere. Calorie counts did not exist on menus. You ordered based on what you wanted and what you could afford and nothing else. And nobody talked about trans fats or saturated fat or childhood obesity in the context of a Saturday McDonald's. This was before nutrition labels were required, before calorie counts on menus, before any of that arrived. Fast food was just food. Quick, cheap, tasty. The idea that it required justification had not arrived yet. You ate a Big Mac and fries without a second thought. The guilt came later. In the 1980s, it was simply lunch. Fast food. In 1980s, Britain was a transplant that took. It arrived foreign and became familiar with a speed that surprised everyone. It was part of the same broad Americanization that brought denim and rock and roll and Hollywood, just later, and in a more practical form. What it displaced was real. The cafe lost customers. Wimpy lost ground it would never recover. And the chip shop felt the edge of the change even where it did not collapse. The independent high street and the grocer, the butcher, the bakery, the pop man with his van was already retreating, and fast food was part of what replaced it. For people who were children in 1980s, Britain, the memories are physical and specific. The smell of McDonald's from the pavement before you reach the door, the squeak of the styrofoam container opening, the foil ashtray with the golden arches embossed on it, the thin hot patty and the soft sweet bun, the toy at the bottom of the Happy Meal box, and somewhere further back, before all of it, the memory of Wimpy. The plate, the knife and fork, the Coke float in a tall glass, the cartoons on the telly in the corner. Fast food arrived in Britain in the 1980s and made itself at home, and the high street has never looked quite the same since.